Hi everyone, Ashley here and welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I have a fun interactive card to share with you using a bunch of Lawn Fawn stamps and supplies. It features a pull tab, which when you pull the tab, a shark actually pops out in a pivot mechanism. So I'm going to show you how I made that pull tab in this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. I'm starting by assembling a lot of the different pieces that will go into the scene. So I cut a piece of white blending cardstock here, and for blending I like to use Strathmore Bristol Smooth because it's just got a really nice texture for blending. And I'm just taking two different colors of blue Distress Oxide ink here on my blending tools and blending them together. And you can see my cat makes an appearance, that's Luna. She loves hanging out with me in my craft room. So I actually cut that piece with a Lawn Fawn Ocean wavy border, and then I used Distress Oxide ink in Tumble Glass and Blueprint Sketch. And the Blueprint Sketch is that bottom darker color, and I sort of just blended them together horizontally to have the darker color at the bottom to make it kind of look like the depths of the ocean. For the next part, I've gone ahead and stamped out a bunch of Lawn Fawn images, and the stamp sets that I used for these images can be found in the description down below the video. I stamped them out in Copic friendly black ink, so I actually used My Favorite Things Extreme Black ink. For me, that's my current favorite black ink that's friendly for Copic markers. It doesn't bleed, and I just find it's a really nice, smooth black color. I'm coloring in the images with my Copic markers, and as you can see, I'm starting with the sailboat, where I just used a couple shades of oranges, and I wanted to keep the sails white, so I just kind of colored in where I think the shading would be with a bit of gray. I'm also using some orange on the lighthouse because I kind of wanted it to match and be consistent. So again, I'm just using two different shades and then coloring in the sections that I thought should be white by adding a little bit of light gray where there would be shadows. I'm adding a few accents in yellow, and then of course using yellow markers to color in where the light would be coming in of the lighthouse because it should be nice and bright and yellow. For the shark, I'm just using some very dark blues on the top half. And I don't usually go for these dark colors, but I thought for this shark it kind of made sense to have him be like a navy blue. So I used some navy blues in areas where I thought there would be more shadow, and then I'm coming in with a lighter, more royal blue to blend out that super dark color. And finally, in an area sort of in the middle where I think the light would be hitting the shark, I'm adding a very light blue. And the way that I'm blending that in, because it didn't really blend very well initially, so what I did is I took the tip of my medium shade and I used my light shade by sort of rubbing it against the tip of the medium shade and then applying it to the paper. So that kind of gives you a nice in-between shade, and if you're ever struggling to have colors blend, I definitely recommend trying that. So again, all you have to do is just take your light shade and kind of rub it against the tip of the marker that is the medium shade, and then that light shade will kind of pick up some of the medium shade. And you can kind of color that onto your paper and it'll sort of be in between light and medium, and it's a really nice way to get two different colors to blend. So I finished coloring in all of the other images, and now it's time to build that pull tab mechanism. I cut a piece of purple cardstock out, and this is purple shimmery cardstock, and this will be sort of the base of the mechanism. I then cut a piece of acetate into a small rectangle shape, which will be used as the sort of pivot mechanism. And I used a little brad to attach that to the bottom of the purple piece, and that allows that pivot sort of spot. So the acetate will turn around that pivot where the brad is. I then glued my little shark onto that piece of acetate, and I'm really just testing out exactly where it should be so that when it's pivoted all the way to the left, it doesn't kind of come out of the edge of the paper, and when you pull it, it kind of comes up over that wave. Once I've decided where I need to put the shark, I just taped him down, and now I can put the second pivot point in. And this is going to be attaching to the pull tab itself. So I took a piece of blue rectangle cardstock, which will be the pull tab, and I just attached it to that acetate rectangle with a brad, a second brad. So now there's two brads. One attaches the acetate to the backing, and one attaches the pull tab to the acetate. And having those two different pivot mechanisms allows for that sort of rotational pivot, where the shark kind of rotates as if it's on a circular axis. So I hope that this helps, and I hope that watching this video kind of explains a little bit how this was built, and if you have any questions, definitely don't hesitate to ask down in the comments below. I'm now more permanently adhering that shark onto the acetate, and I can cut the excess off from behind him so that it doesn't show. I also went ahead and just glued some foam around this whole mechanism so that when I stick that ink blended piece down on top, it has a little bit of space. The whole pivot mechanism has a little bit of space to kind of play around behind there. So you really do need that level of foam to allow your pivot mechanism space. But you want to make sure that when you're placing the foam, you don't interfere with where the pivot mechanism is working. So I really just sort of chose exactly where I knew that that foam wouldn't be blocking the pivot mechanism. So kind of moving the pivot mechanism around and making sure that the foam is not interfering with that. I used some white embossing powder to just stamp out and emboss that little arrow telling the person that they need to pull on that tab. And now the pivot mechanism is done. So now I can work on the final piece of the background of the card, which is sort of the sky and the sun. So again, I'm just using some Distress Oxide to blend here. I used Fossilized Amber as the yellow and Carved Pumpkin as the orange. And I blended sort of a circle of that Fossilized Amber to sort of make like a sunlight center spot. Sunlight spotlight. And then I blended the orange around it. I came in with some tumbled glass for the other side of the sky to show sort of the blue of that sky. Okay, now I can assemble the card. So I'm just gluing that purple piece down onto the sky, and I'm just gluing all of the other little stamped images that I want to be as part of the scene onto the card as well. Again, I'm kind of keeping in mind where I know that that pivot mechanism will be coming out, where that shark needs space, and I'm making sure not to block it. So I'm not using any foam squares here, I'm not lifting any of these images up and giving them dimension because I want the shark to be able to pivot on top of them without getting obstructed. So I'm just taking that sailboat and the little critters and the lighthouse and the rock, and I'm just gluing them straight down onto the card base with some liquid glue so that they're not blocking that shark when he pivots up. Finally, I'm just adding a few clouds to the sky and kind of deciding where I want them to go, and again using some liquid glue to stick them right down because I do not want them to be blocking the shark when he pivots up. So every time I do something, I kind of test and make sure that the shark can still pivot, and I find that it's all good. I cut out the word Jawsome using Finley's ABCs by Lawn Fawn, and I cut it out twice with some orange cardstock and then glued each letter together, and that just gives them a little bit of extra dimension, a little bit more than if it was just one layer of cardstock. I also stamped out Have a on the top and Birthday on the bottom, so the whole sentiment will read, Have a Jawsome Birthday. As you can see on this piece, I also cut a little semicircle out of the right so that when you glue this piece down, you'll see the pull tab sort of sticking out on the right, just behind that little semicircle. And you don't have to do this, but I just find that it's a nice touch. And again, here I am testing that mechanism to make sure that that shark really pops out in that pivot mechanism the way I want him to. And finally, to finish off this card, I'm just adding a couple little fishies to this scene. I actually have a bowl of stamped images that I had already stamped and colored and cut out from other cards but didn't end up using. So I'm just pulling out a couple fish from that little jar and just sticking them around the word Jawsome to kind of liven up that ocean scene a little bit more. And I'm just using a little bit of liquid glue on those guys and sticking them down with my tweezers to make sure they're really nice and stuck. To put this into a card, I'm just taking some Lawn Fawn pattern paper. I use a scalloped pattern, glued it onto a card base, and now I can glue this entire piece down onto that, and that will finish off this card. I'm really just sticking it down to make sure that it's all nice and stuck down onto that card base. So that is the card completed. As you can see, it's very shiny. That shimmer paper is really beautiful. And when you pull on that tab, the little shark pops out of the water in a sort of pivot circular motion. Almost looks like he's kind of attacking the boat, so those little critters are should be a little bit scared, but that's okay. Maybe he's a friendly shark. I really love this mechanism. This is actually the second time I've used it, and if you want to see it in action on a different card, check out another video that I've posted on my channel from the Lawn Fawn Fans Summer YouTube Hop. It should be pretty obvious, but that card also has the same pivot mechanism, so if you want to see it again, definitely check that video out. Thank you so much for watching today, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!